Hi, I'm Geoff Kersey, and in this programme I'm going to be showing you lots of different tips and techniques to help you with your watercolour landscape painting. I'm going to start with skies because I think skies are the key element in any landscape. They set the whole mood and atmosphere for the rest of the painting. So for this first one we're going to do a simple wet into wet sky. I'm going to start by mixing 3 washes of paint. I've got a large number 16 wash brush, and the first colour is a fairly thin wash of cobalt blue to which I'm adding a little touch of rose madder just to warm it. Not too much, I don't want to make a purple. And the next colour I'm going to mix is a wash of translucent grey, a nice rich warm grey. It's a little bit of cloud drifting over the landscape. And I'm going to warm the translucent grey again with a touch of rose madder. I'm going to wash the brush thoroughly, make sure it's really clean before I mix the final wash, which is a thin wash of Naples yellow, that nice creamy colour. And to make it into a warm glow for the base of the sky, I'm adding a bit of vermilion to it. Naples yellow is a bit opaque, so it tends to go a bit chalky if you don't put plenty of water in it. Once the colours are ready, I'm going to take a natural sponge, make sure it's fully charged up with clean water, and wet the whole of the sky area. I've put a bit of masking tape across the bottom here to pick out the area where the sky meets the landscape. And it's given us a sort of a long format where the width of the picture is twice the depth. I think this is a good format for landscape paintings. I often choose this shape. Just to make sure it's really wet, I'm cleaning the sponge and I'm going over it again. I want the sky to stay wet long enough to give me the chance to drop all these colours in without any dry marks forming. So it needs to be nice and wet, but at the same time trying to not get puddles in the middle. And then as soon as you finish wetting the background, it's time to get on with the painting. I've got a large oval wash brush and I'm going to wet that and then charge it up with the mixture of Naples yellow and vermilion, and I'm going to put that in the base of the sky to give us a nice glow just above the horizon. Putting plenty of paint in, working quite rapidly, and I'm going to paint this colour about halfway up. Add a touch of water to soften it into the white paper higher up. And then straight away I'm getting that mixture of cobalt blue with a little bit of rose madder in it. And I'm now going to the top of the sky to put this in. And I'm using the brush on its side now to put soft shapes in and to cover a large area quickly. It's important when you're working wet in wet that the paper is still wet when you're finished, then you just leave it to dry. If it starts to dry while you're halfway through, you can get what we call cauliflowers or drying marks. Okay, and I'm bringing that blue lower down to touch that Naples yellow and vermilion mixture, which gives us a nice grey. It forms a nice grey on the paper. A bit more blue at the top right there. And then while it's still wet, I'm going straight in to the mixture of translucent grey with a hint of rose madder. You don't need to wash your brush out between the blue and the grey. They're going to merge together on the paper anyway. And I'm just laying this in with the side of the brush again to give sort of curved, slightly cloud-like shapes across the paper. Now these shapes should get a little bit smaller as we get nearer to the horizon, so that the clouds near the horizon look further away. That gives us this feeling of distance, what we call aerial perspective. And in fact, the clouds I'm putting in towards the bottom are just with the very tip of the brush to make smaller marks. I think at the top right-hand side we could do with a bit more strength of colour, so I'm putting a bit more grey into there. But it's important when you paint a sky like this that you don't overdo it, that you know when to stop, so that you leave some nice areas of white showing through. And that's it. As you can see, I've spent less than a minute on the actual painting of that, and it's now time to just leave it to dry on its own. And now that that's dry, I've taken the tape off the bottom, and you can see that that's ready now to turn into a landscape. It seemed very simple, didn't it? All I did was wet the background and float those colours in for maybe half a minute, no more. But that's the whole key to it. Don't try to make it too complicated. The worst thing you can do with a sky like this is to overwork it. The more paint you put into it, the darker and duller it gets. Remember to leave some white space to give the impression of clouds. So you can see from this example of a finished painting how I would use a dramatic grey sky like this to highlight points in the landscape, like the light on the snow and on the walls of the buildings on the left. Look also at that faint pink glow in the distance. It really gives us the feeling that those trees across the meadows are miles away. This second example is a wet on dry sky. A little bit different, but we start off by mixing some colours in the same way. I've got the number 16 brush again, and make sure it's really clean, none of that grey in it from the last sky. And I'm going to take a wash of Naples yellow, quite a lot of it. There's a fair size area to cover, plenty of water in it as well. So because it's wet on dry, I only need to mix one colour at a time. So I'm now going to take the natural sponge again, fill it up with clean water and wet the whole sky area right down to the masking tape. A good tip when you're doing this is to look sideways on at it to catch the shine of the water. I find the sponge easier for wetting the background than a flat brush because it's easier to coat it without missing any streaks. And then straight away I'm taking the large oval wash brush again and I'm charging it up with the Naples yellow wash and bringing that in from the bottom right across the paper. I'm going to try and leave an area in the middle with a little patch of white paper. That will end up being the brightest part of the sky, like a sort of highlight in the centre. Put plenty of water in. A bit more of the Naples yellow down to the bottom. And that just needs some drying time. So now that that background is completely dry, and it does have to be really dry before you do the next stage, I'm going to take the number 16 brush again and take some French ultramarine, a really strong, vivid blue, very transparent. That's quite important because with this second wash, you need to be able to glimpse the colour underneath. And I'm going to grey it slightly by adding a hint of burnt sienna. So I'm going to start at the top left-hand side with some horizontal streaks across the paper. And these must be horizontal. You must keep them level as you work your way across. Adding a touch of water as you go along to soften it in places and vary the strength of the colour. In some places I'm using more the tip of the brush as well to make a thinner mark, more of a streak. Bringing some in from the left there and then bringing some in from the right. Keeping it nice and horizontal, and in one or two areas just softening the colour in with a drop of clean water, but in some areas leaving harder edges. Working my way down the paper using the very tip of the brush. Your brush needs to be in good condition and have a good fine point to it. Bit of grey right along the bottom, at the bottom of the tape. Just streaking it in. I'm lightening the colour a bit by adding a bit more water to the wash. And then get some more clean water in to soften it. You need to work quite rapidly so you still have the opportunity to soften these edges before the paint dries. And then touch more water into the wash to thin it slightly and a few more streaks across. Just blending them in, and in the centre of the sky you just glimpse the fact that the background is that bit lighter because that's where I left some white paper. And let's bring a few more streaks in with the very tip of the brush. Again, don't spend too long on it before we just leave it to dry. So now that this is completed, you can see that because we let the background dry first, it enabled us to get some harder edges in these streaks across the sky. But also because I kept adding a little bit of clean water here and there with this number 16 brush, we got some softer edges into the streaks as well. And it's that mixture of harder and softer edges that gives this sky its effect. As you can see from this example, I've now turned that sky into a simple wintry landscape. I started by re-wetting the bottom part of the sky and dropping those colours in for the distant bushes and trees to make them look misty and far away. I then used the same grey mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna for the shadows across the snowy landscape.